Now we're talking about a very emotive issue, but a very important issue. And to do that, we'd like to welcome to the show Tony Murray, who is part of the Before We Die campaign. Tony, you're very, very welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you, and it's our pleasure. You might tell us a bit about why parents have to make the running on this issue.
Um, I suppose in a sense we're living with it day every single day. Once your child is diagnosed, you have a struggle to get the most basic of services. And to some degree, you're so busy just trying to paddle just to stay above float. And then as you get older, you begin to think not if I'm not able to care, but when I'm not able to care. And I think a lot of parents, we would have conversations over coffee, you meet people at social clubs or whatever, an arts club, and that's very often the conversation. And that's where the name came from, because people say, what's going to happen? And it just had to be about, well, we really need to put something in place before we die. I don't want to leave the responsibility uh, to my two sons to look after Aoife. It's not their responsibility.
Yeah.
And their life and their activities have been compromised by the lack of service, not by Aoife, but by the lack of service. And it's just not fair on them, or also like their partners or their own children, to take on the responsibility. And that I was aware of because my wife had a sister with Down syndrome.
Hey.
And Susan, my wife, she had to do a lot of the minding, the caring for Aileen, even though she was in a residential unit before she died. But even still, you're on call, you're the go-to person if something goes wrong. So we know that whatever happens, that Aoife's brothers will always be in that kind of caring, responsible, overseeing role, but they shouldn't have the responsibility of the day-to-day intensive care that Aoife and so many of the children with ID of our members have.
Okay. We should say at this stage what the campaign is and what it's all about.
So the campaign Before We Die really comes about with the absolute crisis, and I've referred to it as the black hole of residential services. You realize pretty quickly that there is absolutely no plan to house the thousands of people with an intellectual disability, that effectively the government and the HSE wait for an emergency. And that is so unfair on the person who has got an intellectual disability to wait until the parents are too sick or die to provide care. And when we talk about it being a black hole, somebody once said to my wife, "Oh, it must be like a dark cloud hanging over you." And she said, "No, no, no, the dark clouds lift. And as we know from the recent weather, we've had a dreadful winter, but we know it's going to get better at some
Yeah,
stage.
yeah,
And
yeah.
then it's a lovely bright day, and you think, yeah, look, you forget about the rain." And but with a black hole, it sucks in light. No light is emitted, no hope. And so really, it was down to trying to force, cajole, plead, bargain, all of those things with the government, the HSE. But it's a wider issue. It's also the Department of Housing. It's not just about
Yeah.
money. And what we've realized in the past few months is that it's a whole government issue, and it's a systemic problem rather than just a bit of money here, a bit of money there, and that'll solve it. So, it's really trying to educate. When we started, I naively just thought it was a question of money, but it's not. It's a question of a system that hasn't been designed, so therefore it's broken. Susan, again, my wife, has said many times, it's a cruel and heartless system, and it doesn't put the person with a disability center of the whole
Yeah.
of the whole process. The process is the center, and you have to try and navigate your way through that. And the process is opaque, it's not joined up, and effectively the process is there is no process.
Of course.
And that's what the campaign is finding out. And that's what the campaign is about. It's trying to force the government into putting a plan in place to have a plan.
Okay. And how many people are involved in it? And when did the campaign start?
It began in November of last year. My daughter Aoife is in an arch club which meet in the handball alley in Croke Park. It began by it has been bubbling around in my head for about 2 years. When I turned 17, retired, and you kind of think, okay, I am getting older. And so I called a meeting of local TDs and some of the parents who were in the Arch Club. Like what you realize, I suppose, also as well, is that as your children get older, you become more socially isolated. Because when they were younger, you were going to birthday parties. If they were in a school, you were meeting at school. You know, there's a lot of activities. But then COVID happened, so a lot of those activities actually closed down
Yeah.
and they never resumed. Now the Arch Club is fantastic. So we had a meeting one Monday night in the Arch Club in Croke Park. Two politicians turned up. Yeah, two turned up. One TD and one representative from a local TD in our area. And there was a letter in the Irish Times, sorry, there's an article in the Irish Times about how the HSE had lost tens of millions of money by not collecting, by double paying people, all sorts of just mismanagement.
Yeah.
I wrote a letter to the Irish Times, and that was picked up by Liveline. So I was interviewed on Liveline. A lot of people heard that, and that was subsequently picked up by Alva Keneally on RTE News. And that gave me a license to talk to people. It's very hard to go up to people you're having a cup of coffee in your social club, in the Arch Club, and say, oh yeah, by the way, have you thought about what happens when you die? But because I brought it up in the media, oh, we saw you on radio, we heard, we saw you on television, we heard you on radio.
And that makes it all about you.
And then that makes it possible to open up the conversation. I really couldn't do that until that letter and the interview appeared. So now we would have on our mailing list, we've nearly 1,000, and on our Facebook page, we've over 1,000 on our Facebook page.
And
the WhatsApp group.
You spoke to government.
Yeah.
What reaction did you get?
A lot of sympathy.
All right.
A lot of sympathy. A lot of nothing. A lot. Yeah. But I say they have their listening ears on what we say to our grandchildren. But then I tell them you need to go to the wardrobe now and take out your action suit. I think in fairness, and you have to be fair to like individual TDs, you can't just look at TDs as being one homogenous group and say politicians don't care. They have so many, people calling for various issues.
Yeah.
And to some degree, they're almost like social workers. They're like lawyers, they're like solicitors advising people. There's so many demands. So it wasn't until there was a concerted effort by the group who then articulate the issues rather than my personal issues. So when they're dealing with a personal problem, they just see it as being a problem that Tony's daughter has no residential care. But because we went as a group and we could give them an analysis of why Aoife hasn't got a care. And I think the name as well cut through. I was involved in 2 other lobby groups many years ago. And I think this is a good lesson for people watching and listening. If you're starting a group, you really need to pick a name that cuts through. The first group I was with many, many, many years ago was called PAM, Parents Association of the Mentally Handicapped. Well, I mean, we can't, that name is now very dated.
Yeah.
And it was such a catch-all group, a catch-all title that it meant everything and nothing. The next group I got involved in was the NPSA, National Parents and Siblings Alliance. Now, the NPSA, I mean, either sounds like, as I've said, a revolutionary movement, like in South Africa, or an insurance company. I mean, it doesn't cut through, where are you from, the NPSA? And even when you say National Parents and Siblings Alliance, you kind of go, what? So I come from a media background,
Right.
and so I was very conscious that you need a name that you don't have to explain. And I think if I ever only did one thing in life, thinking up that name was, I have to say, was brilliant
Absolutely.
because it cuts through and you talk to politicians and they immediately go, okay, and they're looking at you, like parents of my age and some younger and older, and they kind of know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So I think that if anybody was asking advice, I think you need to pick a name that you try with different people, you almost test it and see what's their reaction. And if they look at you kind of going, what? Change the name. Find a name that works, that says really what your campaign is about. Um, and so all of those things kind of happened. And then I think we just got very lucky with media coverage that was picked up. And I think the thing that really shocked people was I met the Taoiseach down in Cork with three of our members, three mothers.
Right.
And one of them said to the Taoiseach, she was completely broken by the level of care her adult daughter needed. And she said, I've reconciled myself that I cannot do it anymore because I have two other children and I'm going to have to leave her in A&E. And I was in the Dáil observing a committee meeting, and she texted me to say that she'd left her daughter in A&E. And as it
Wow.
happened, I was being interviewed that afternoon by News Talk. And I could say live on air, I've just got this text to say a mother who was broken, she cannot do it anymore, has left her daughter in A&E. And that I think really shocked people. But then what really shocked people was the reaction of the HSE who wrote her a letter, and the guards were involved, and like dreadful stuff. And they, in the letter, which they haven't taken back and they haven't clarified, they said that parents have a legal responsibility indefinitely to provide accommodation for their child if she has an intellectual disability. There's no
Wow.
other groups, there's no other group of parents in Ireland who have been told that. So
Yeah.
you're told that one hand you have this legal responsibility indefinitely. And I think people were really shocked by that. And politicians and the minister, Emer Higgins, went in and I slapped the letter on the table and said, read that letter. I mean, that's the reality here. That's the HSE. And it's really interesting that a few weeks later, the HSE were in the Dole committee that we were in last week, the Joint Committee on Disability Matters.
Yeah.
And Liam Quaid and Tom Clonan tried to get an answer from the HSE of what law you were citing. And they kept saying, oh, we can't talk about individual cases, we can't. And said, no, we're talking about what law. They couldn't get an answer.
Yeah.
And as I
Because
said,
they don't know.
because they make it up as they go along. But also, I've used the term bullying, and bullying is a legal defined term. And this is a form of bullying. This is a threatening letter. And so we brought it up with every TD. We've met the ministers, like including Norma Foley, and there's still no clarification. We
Right.
said, tell us the law. But straying into, and this is, I suppose, complicated, and I know um, there'll be some people who are big supporters of the Capacity Act. But so you have the Capacity Act who will say that Aoife, who has a mental capacity of like a 4-year-old, has got full capacity.
Wow.
So, and then at the other level, or at the other side, you have the HSE saying that the parents we have a legal responsibility to provide care for her.
Wow.
Well, we can't provide care if Aoife has got capacity because under the Capacity Act, Aoife is autonomous and a doctor can say she's over 18, she's got capacity, I can't have you in the room, this is a private consultation, please go. Now, we're lucky a lot of doctors are not going to do that, but they
Yeah.
could.
But they could.
What's actually just happened recently now, I need to get clarification, but I was told by a parent that the Dental Association have now come out and they said they can't work with the Capacity Act. Because if you think about it, who likes going to the dentist?
Yeah.
I mean, you don't wake up in the morning and think, "Will I have a coffee?" Or
Yeah.
will I go to the no, I'll go to the dentist instead of the gym. You don't. So you bring your child, your adult uh, who might need dental treatment, and if they look at the chair and say no, the dentist in law has to say, "I can't do anything."
Yeah. And that's
So it's
shocking.
unworkable.
That's
I mean,
shocking.
no,
And
but that's the law.
a lot of what you said is absolutely shocking. And it's a sorry state of affairs in Ireland today in the 21st century that they can't come up with a plan.
Well, you see, it's been in some way, we know historically it was the church and the orders who provided care, institutional care. The religious orders, they don't have the numbers. They got out of that area to some. They managed, but they don't run them. Then they, quite rightly, uh, they decided that the big institutional care behind the high walls, the St. Vincent's on the Navan Road, all those, Portrane, they weren't appropriate, and they
Yeah.
really weren't appropriate. But in some way, it was very old-fashioned. But you might have said that some of the residents there had actually good care.
Yeah.
Okay, they were in dormitories, it was institutional, but they had care, they were safe, there were services, wraparound service. Anyway, but they moved people out into the community, but the community never went to them.
I
So you
get
move
you.
people out
I
of the
get you.
institutions, but the community, society has to go to them. It
Yeah.
didn't to some degree, it did. Like you can't
But it
over
didn't
that, but
really.
it didn't really. So, and the funding and the structures weren't there. So we're now left with a kind of crazy situations where they're opposed to the HSC will not fund anything what they see as a congregated setting, which is anything over 10. But that could be two houses or three houses with four people in it. That makes
Yeah.
12 beside each other, which will mean you have safety, you might have transport, you have a shared transport, a shared facility. But the HSE see that as a congregated setting, which is not the way I think the government envisages congregated setting behind walls. And my wife makes the observation, and she's very good at this, that isn't it interesting that we can't have a congregated setting, but Aoife's day centre in a shopping centre in Santry has 45.
Wow.
So we can have a congregated setting for a day, but we can't have it for her residential. And 45 in one place in
That's,
effectively a shopping centre with no outdoor space.
yeah.
That seems to be acceptable, but then they play hardball. So when politicians ask us, well, what's your model? We've just done a survey and we got over 1,000 responses. And we haven't done a complete analysis, but on a cursory look, we're talking about 80% of our parents have said that what they would like to see is the equivalent of a retirement village.
I got you. That makes
So
sense
that
now. That
yeah,
really makes sense.
you've got community, you've wraparound service, you've safety, you've also, which is really quite important, you've supervision of staff and you've got collegiality and
Yeah.
that learning that staff have from each other. I know when I started teaching, you pick up just talking to staff in the canteen, like coffee, you say something, and, oh, well, I wouldn't, or maybe you should have done this, or, you just pick up stuff.
Yeah.
But if you're isolated in a house on your own, it's a pretty deadly job. I mean, it could be pretty boring. So a lot of people go to work for obviously the money, but they also go to work for the social aspects of work. So if you have a retirement village type situation, and there's one or two examples of them, it makes sense. The other irony that we're facing, and this is hard to imagine, when they built Cheeverstown in the 80s and 90s, that was seen as the Brave New World, the model. And that was residential. It had a swimming pool. So it got a community facility. And you kind of go, yeah, the community comes in, use the pool, its revenue, all of those kind of wraparound services, social. and they're shutting it down and they're turning it into a retirement home for elderly. So the people with a disability have been moved out,
Are kicked
but
out.
they have been moved out to disperse housing. But the project of selling it has been held up because some of the residents who were moved out have become older.
Yeah.
Their care needs have increased, not suitable in the house they were in. They have to move them back into the
Yeah.
facility
Wow.
into Cheeverstown because, as you may know, or a lot of
Yeah,
your
yeah, I
listeners and
know.
viewers know, people, particularly with Down syndrome, as they age, they often age prematurely.
Yeah.
Dementia is a huge issue. So if you've got dementia, which is what happened to my sister-in-law, she got dementia in her 40s. She had to move to a specialist unit because the house she was in couldn't cope, hadn't got the service that was suitable for her. So you're looking at they're shutting down a perfectly good facility where there's a housing
Which
crisis,
works.
which works, and I don't think the parents were complaining,
Yeah.
and I don't think the residents were complaining, but somebody decides it's an ideology, I think,
Yeah.
about what we can't do to make me look good. I mean, I'll give you another crazy example, and we brought this up with the minister. There's in the St. Michael's House headquarters up in Ballymun.
Yeah.
It's a low wall, there's a school, their head office is there, there's a clinic, all that kind of thing. So it's a, facility. But historically, there was a group of about 6 or 8 houses. I've never been down there. And they're known as the Glens because they're in a hollow.
That's
You
right.
can't actually see them from the road. So HICWA have decided that that's a congregated setting, and because you go in the main gate. Now, it's a low wall, very
Yeah.
modern, big wide gate. So they are forcing St. Michael's House to open up a gate, which will go on to the Griffith Avenue extension, which has just been redesigned. So the gate would have to go through land who God knows owns. It could be
Yeah. Yeah.
Dublin City Council. But where it's placed, the gate will be right beside the traffic lights. So traffic will probably say, you can't have a gate
Yeah.
at a
Yeah.
traffic light
Yeah.
because it just, you can't. And as I said to the minister, who will pay for that? Just to make somebody feel good. Now, the people, the residents of the Glens would all be severe to profound.
Yes, absolutely.
Like having a gate, where they come in or out is not an issue. And so like I said to the minister, I said, who will pay for that? And she kind of looked and said, well, I said, Aoife, my daughter and the other service users will pay for that in the absence of service that they will
Yeah.
experience because you've opened up a gate. Just to make somebody feel good. Like if the parents were saying this is terrible, you'd say, okay. If the
Of
residents
course.
were saying, but when you see that you're talking profound intellectual disability, usually in wheelchairs or, not even wheelchairs, the bigger, you're talking at the extreme of disability. And what's that about?
Yeah. I'll
So,
tell you exactly what it's about. It's a guy sitting in an office with a map of the area and taking a box. That's
well,
it.
it's actually worse than that, though, in a way, I have to say. It's actually worse because you have some of the advocacy services who are peddling this line that it's about choice and lead the life that people want to lead. And you kind of go, that's okay for the very mild or for people who have a physical disability
Yeah.
because they have agency. But when you look at Aoife, who's able and she's able to read, she walks, but she's like a 4-year-old,
Yeah.
5-year-old in other ways. There isn't a line you can say, okay, she's reached that level and she's definitely, she's higher and lower. Like in some cases, our grandchildren at 4 are not passing her out, but you can see in the next year or so they will have passed her out. In some ways, they won't be able to read like her, but
Yeah.
they will pass her out in understanding. So, but some of the advocacy agencies and big associations are peddling this line about choice and live the life that we, want to read. A number of years ago, I'll give you an example of how skewed the system has actually become. A number of years ago, I was trying to get a group organized around school leavers
Right.
because people were leaving school and then no service. And I said to a few groups I was in touch with, why don't we try and meet and try and see where all the issues are and then go to government and say, there's 5 in Kerry, there's 10 in Cork, there's 20 in Lee, wherever. So we decided to meet in the Down syndrome office because it's near the Red Cow. And we thought rather than drag people into Dublin, they could park and, get to all that. And Down Syndrome Ireland had a poster on the wall. And it was of a man with Down syndrome at a photocopying machine. And it said, today he's doing the photocopying. Now, I'm paraphrasing, I might
Yeah, go
not
on.
exactly. But today he's doing the photocopying, tomorrow he could be running the company.
Brilliant.
Now, there's probably a tiny 1% of people with Down syndrome who could, do that kind of, very owner's job of running a company. But the vast majority of people with Down syndrome could not.
Of course.
And certainly as they get older, they could not. A lot of the members in the Arch Club would have Down syndrome, and quite a lot of them, as they're aging, are showing signs of early dementia, anxiety, mobility issues. The idea of running a company is just nonsense. But here's Down syndrome, who should know better, peddling this nonsense.
Yeah.
So this nonsense has been fed from the bottom up as well. It's not just a bureaucrat. It's been fed from the bottom up. And I think you have to look at it all. And oddly enough, Minister Foley said about residential and school, she said, one size doesn't fit all. And of course, politicians will always talk about themselves. And she talked about when she was Minister of Education, there was a policy of closing down special schools.
Yeah.
Now, as it happened, my wife worked in a special school before Aoife was born. She was special ed teacher. And there was that special schools are the devil incarnated, almost the Antichrist. But Susan would have said the thing about special schools was that they had a cohort of expertise and experience, and they had more of a wraparound service. And sending children just because of an ideology out to mainstream school certainly works for some, but doesn't work for all. It works when they're very young, but when they get to teenage years, and the teenagers in the class are now into boys, into girls, you have all that kind of, they're trying to find, they're generally not going to befriend somebody who has an intellectual disability, because that's not cool anymore. So when they're younger, so as one parent described it, who went down that path with her daughter, and he said he realized that his daughter was kind of a mascot for the school.
Right.
But was she integrated? She eventually moved into like a special school because she was stressed, she was showing signs of anxiety, she couldn't keep up, and she was lonely. And she hadn't got the kind of services that she needed. So Minister Foley said the one size doesn't fit all, which is absolutely true.
Yeah.
And the same in residential, that the one size, so you can't put people into like dispersed housing, into apartments if you have an intellectual disability on the moderate to severe end.
Now, Tony,
Now, yeah,
I'm really sorry to cut across you. I could talk to you all day on the subject,
right.
Because I'm really interested in it. But we've come to the end of our time.
Oh, okay.
I'm so sorry.
No, I talk too much.
Not at all. Everything you talk about is absolutely perfect.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for coming and talking to us at Disability Matters. I most certainly will come back to you very soon and get you back on to complete the job. And I wish you the best of luck with the project.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks for talking to us. All the best.
All the best. Thank you. Now, bye-bye.